First off, definitely, we're going to be going into a couple of rabbit holes. And again, repetition isn't always a bad thing. Now, to really kind of tell the story, especially with, Alcoholics Anonymous as it goes, over, you know, out in the world pretty much. The thing that really kind of kicked it off, just to set the stage for the Saturday Evening Post article with Jack Alexander is the first one that came out was, of course, the Liberty article. And what's pretty fascinating is, you know, this is pretty much the first one where it went across the nation. But again, just coming from a point of reference. The fun fact is was this really the first? And can't get away without showing that there was one that was about 2 weeks prior to it. It was the same article, but it was in September 16th in Liberty magazine that was issued in Canada. So we know it is September 30th was the first, but really it was September 16th. And it was the title is a little different. Instead, it's Alcoholics and God. But instead of saying by Morris Markey, it says a frank discussion. And just to point out a couple of differences on the two articles. This was the September 30 blue cover in the U.S. and you can see Alcoholics and God and the setup. The articles are identical, but if you pay attention to the illustration, I think that's pretty interesting. And of course, this is the article as it was in the Canadian version. And again, a different, kind of more defined article, but pretty much it is all the same. So again, interesting illustrations for both. It's literally, the age old story. Drunks coming home sloshed again with two women in each. First one again, the mother seeing the drunken husband, and then the daughter who is looks a little angry. And of course, in the U.S. one was again, the man coming home drunk, and the frightened, wife and maybe her friend just aghast at the whole operation. So, but that was the one that really kind of started this ball rolling. So there are pockets of enthusiasm that started popping up, here and there, but nothing compared to what's about to happen. To really tell the story, gonna just also show a little history on the Saturday Evening Post itself. It was actually a very old. It's been around since the beginning, pretty much. It was started by Ben Franklin in 1728, and of course in Philadelphia. And all this is really going to center around Philadelphia. So another little excerpt there gives some dates. The founding 1728, 1729. It, kind of became a regular issue. And 1765, he sold it. It became to the Gazette, which was another publication, and it went from there. In 1821, it was actually switched hands again. Atkinson and Alexander Publishing, still in Philadelphia, and finally it became Curtis Publishing, and they kicked it to a whole new level in 1897, and it has been there ever since. In fact, when you look at Jack Alexander and his background, he is always employed by Curtis Publishing Company, so that explains that. Now, just a little story. Jack Alexander, that's actually not his full name. That's his nickname he got in college. His full name is John Hollis Alexander. He was actually born February 8th of 1903 in St. Louis, Missouri. In fact, his childhood is all in St. Louis, never moved. In fact, he went to high school at kind of a laboratory prep school, St. Louis University High School. And of course, from there, just went literally across the street to St. Louis University. Now, a little note here, he had two older brothers during this time frame. They were all around the same time when he was a freshman. Roy Alexander, his oldest brother, was a senior, and his middle brother, Calvert P., was a sophomore. So pretty interesting there. And from the very start, he wanted to become, and he actually became a very successful journalist, writer. In fact, he wrote for the St. Louis University newsletter called The Breeze. and he was the editor in chief for that time frame. Now he ended up getting married. Her name was Anita Mueller, and became Anita Mueller Alexander, but on October 22nd of 1932, and she was a fellow newspaper reporter. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And there's just a little brief description of her going through St. Louis University, as well as their wedding announcement and description. It was released on October 25th, and so pretty interesting. Now, again, note John was the youngest of three brothers. In fact, his wife and two brothers were journalists. So I wonder what dinner at the holidays was talked about. It that entire family were all journalists, and of course, his brother ended up becoming managing editor of Time magazine. So I thought that was pretty neat. And his middle brother actually has a unique story. He went and joined the clergy as in the Jesuit order, and of course became Reverend Calvert Page Alexander, and he became the editor of Jesuit Missions magazine, and that was based out of New York. In fact, Reverend Calvert Alexander was staff at the Church of St. Francis Xavier, also known as Xavier High School. In fact, it's that entire block, which is on 30 West 16th Street in New York. And what's really fascinating is that it was about 6 blocks from Calvary Church and Sam Schumacher. And when you think about it, Jesuits and Episcopal, you just it's very thin. But again, you always got to wonder if Sam and knew about the neighbors, especially clergy and up in the New York area. So plus, another interesting thing is keep in mind St. Louis. We'll circle back to that later on, but interesting to see the path of this celebrated March 1941 Jack Alexander article. And of course, this is very summed up, but how did it all really kind of begin? And it was really at the writing period. So first off, we have, an interaction between Mayo, John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo, Maryland. We also have Hank Parkhurst. He's plays a role on this, and Jimmy Burwell. And it's these guys in that writing period, and of course Bill Wilson involved as the main author. But their interaction, and Bill is kind of this spectating as an umpire, this discussion among those 4 individuals about religion versus psychology. And of course, we covered that in a Wednesday meeting recently, but eventually, it came to be. And on April 1939, it actually was printed, and the big book is now out in the world. Now, we just talked about the September 30th Liberty Magazine article that kind of went out on the airwaves. Now, this is the thing that started it. So this actually is responsible for the Jack Alexander article. In fact, a gentleman in Philadelphia by the name of George Ignatius Sullivan, diehard Philadelphia kid, he actually reads the article in Liberty while drinking. So I thought that was pretty interesting. He has a transformational experience, or some kind of spiritual upheaval, this change of thinking. He writes New York and requests for information. It was the reply by Ruth Hawk, and George Sullivan was considered a loner in Philadelphia. Now, he stayed there. He did not travel to New York or Akron, Ohio, but he was kind of the single flag. So it all centered around him. Again, and it sounds like a small contingent begins to grow there in Philadelphia. Now, one of the things they used to do was keep in mind, when business people would travel to places, they would bring Alcoholics Anonymous with them and a list of people to help. And of course, George Sullivan was one of them. In fact, Jimmy Burwell was given George's name because he was again going to Philly on his business, and of course he pays George a visit. And this is when it really kind of was kicked into this next level. Philly begins. They meet at George's house, and of course, a handful of early members and the start of the first AA meeting in Philadelphia. Now, when you're, got a handful of people meeting in the house, one is the first thing that they're pretty much taught, especially by the experienced, educated, as Ruth talks about them, alcoholics, is, in order to carry the message. So they're thinking, how can we do this? And after some growth, again, how can we spread this message? And then someone, Jimmy, and we'll look at that in a little while, but they approach a bookstore and ask the bookstore if they will sell the AA book there. Now, just so happens that a woman by the name of Helen Hammer happened to just be in this bookstore and overhear this conversation. And of course, when the store refused to sell that book, we don't have any drunks here, pretty much. She got them in touch with her husband, and of course, her husband is a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. A. Weiss Hammer, and of course, he's mentioned as periodically through AA Comes of Age, but it was through Dr. A. Weiss Hammer and St. Luke's Hospital. In fact, Hammer falls in love with AA. He opens a little tiny clinic there in St. Luke's, and of course is amazed at what the results are. And it just so happens that he has a friend. He reaches out and of course tells his friend Judge Curtis Bach, Saturday Evening Post, to look into this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. So Buck calls in his pretty much, free agent at this time. His name was Jack Alexander, and we'll show that in a couple of slides, to actually look into the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's kind of how it all unfolded in a nutshell. Again, very summed up. Now, in October 1940, Bill went to Philadelphia to talk to Judge Curtis Bach, who was the co-owner of the Saturday Evening Post. Now, what's really interesting, the story behind the article began when the owner of the Saturday Evening Post, Curtis Bach, learned of AA from two friends. And of course, one of those two friends is Dr. A. Weiss Hammer. And the other one is somebody else. So pretty interesting. I think I skipped the slide, but it continues again. May 1957 Grapevine article tells a little story about the interaction that Hammer had. It said that he opened his home to all AA members, secured the Philadelphia group its first meeting rooms outside of the house, kind of bigger, better things. He also introduced AA to another doctor by the name of Dr. Stouffer, great AA friend to be, who then was a chief psychiatrist at the Philadelphia General Hospital, and that's going to become kind of paramount in the story of this article. And the big note here is, at this time, again, Jack Alexander was a major investigative reporter. Again, wrote several pieces for the Saturday Evening Post, and one of the interesting things is some of the recent articles that lead up to AA. He literally exposed. He was going to show the truth, and one of the things he did was, of course, the Jersey rackets. So very accomplished. Some reports exposed highly risky ventures again, but that would be that way again. It was out to show the truth on pretty much everything that he did. Now, he's got to be thinking when he's listening to this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is just something that I would hear, a cure for incurable drunkenness, right? Rehabilitation for hopeless lushism. And of course, it is brought to you by a bunch of drunks who want people to buy their book. A feat never accomplished before since mankind crushed grapes, dating back to 7,000 years old. But this small little venture of individuals, they're the ones that figured it out. So of course, some of the things Jack Alexander set out to really expose the fellowship, but after his investigating and firsthand witnessing these miracles, and that'll come into play later on. Again, performed by this new movement. Now, he became sold on the idea, and of course wrote the 41 article described as placed in our forward to our second edition, placed such a compelling picture of AA before the general public that word of this new hope traveled everywhere, and it traveled fast. Now, here are some of the articles he wrote prior to AA. Again, this investigative nature of his. first one was this. This came out August 26th of 1939. So this was called Boss on the Spot. And it was basically he exposed the Jersey rackets in this one. And the guy's name was Enoch Lewis or Nucky Johnson. He was a political crime boss of Atlantic City, kind of this, he was all in the gray and never again, this was one of the photographs that was taken that was used in this article. We're not going to really go too much in depth, just to show that Al Capone is, again, walking arm by arm with Nucky Johnson. So tells you who the company is. And of course, in this article, he, some of the things that he did, again, they asked an associate of Nucky Johnson what they thought of Jack Alexander's piece, and called it a deft blistering, made the boss mad. He's sore as hell. Why, the piece said that he ate a dozen eggs for breakfast and he never ate more than 6 in his life. So Jack Alexander's talking about this guy eating eggs. So if you make a mobster eat eggs, I'm not sure what that means. But again, he exposed this is the story of the Jersey Rackets. And when you look at that photograph, again, the original is this, and this came from the New Jersey State Judicial Archives. So technically, this is Exhibit A in the trial. I don't know that for sure, but again, you can see the two gentlemen walking down the pier at Jersey. So now, this is, again, one of two articles that was literally butted right up to the Alcoholics Anonymous article. This one was October 26th of 1940, and this was Boss Hagen. The title, of course, King Hanky Panky of New Jersey, and Boss Haig is actually the mayor of Jersey City. And what's pretty fascinating, again, a tell-all expose, of the shady goings on. It was several pages, again, all the gray areas and activities, a few instances of trouble. In fact, in the opening paragraph, it says that in this mayor's 23 years, as he enjoyed the investigative attentions of committees sent by the United States Senate, the New Jersey legislation, and agents of the Justice Department and Treasury Department. So this guy covered all the bases. And of course, this was, the mayor, and Jack Alexander just, shined a giant searchlight on this individual in this particular article. The one that butted up right to it, again, just coincidence. It's a very, it's not a tell-all, but it's just an interesting, look into, some of the stuff he writes about. But this was about Just Call Me Seor, and it was a heartfelt, neutral, pretty much nice story of a Texan by the name of Cyrus Rowlett, who was the owner of American Airways. And of course, no negative disclosure or investigative work, just an average piece of an incredibly nice individual. So, but again, a reason, I do find the content neat, and this is the reason why I threw it in there, and it is about American Airlines. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. And if you didn't really catch it, American Airlines, well, it's pretty thin, but Ruth Hawk always flies the friendly skies on the AA flagship. And if you look on the wing of that particular aircraft, it says AA. So, little, it is thin. It's incredibly thin, but you got to, AA, this is what he did prior to doing actual Alcoholics Anonymous. But so the story, again, Jack Alexander was given this assignment for AA. Immediately, he begins to do a piece on AA. And it's interesting because from the very start, he thought that something was not right. In fact, we were drunks. We were happy. We were enthusiastic. Something had to be a little off to him. Red flags started popping up all over the place. Were we a racket? And if so, he is going to expose it. Now, Jack meets Bill and the New York Alcoholics Anonymous contingent. A couple of recovered alcoholics actually pay him a visit at his own, possibly telling Jack their stories, kind of like what they had done in the early Rockefeller dinner of 1940. And Jack's just sitting there, biding his time and just trying to read in between the lines. He will write about it later in a Grapevine article. Later on, we'll get to that in a couple of slides. But at first, he thought we were way too happy. We were just the happiest go lucky. We behaved like a bunch of actors sent out by some Broadway casting agency, and that is actually in that article in 45 for the Grapevine that he wrote. The second of these three articles. Now, in the same fashion, again, Frank Amos investigated these cure claims, which, again, referring to the same type of, background. Frank Amos did some investigating, and now Jack Alexander is doing the investigating. But Frank Amos, back in the day, beginning in 38, went and did his research for the Rockefeller Foundation. And it was around this time again that Jack Alexander starts this process again. And from there, again, since they were already in Philadelphia, and it was, again, this is where Dr. A. Wise Hammer comes back into play. They came in contact with through Dr. Hammer, introduced to Dr. Stouffer, John Franklin Stouffer, another great friend to be, and was the chief psychiatrist at Philadelphia General Hospital. Now, here's the note. It was again, it was Weiss Hammer's wife, Helen, met Jim, described as Jim, possibly Jimmy Burwell. Again, got this entire ball rolling. Now, note two is there's no picture of Dr. Stouffer, but Philly General Hospital will be key in the article to come. In fact, interesting that Philadelphia General Hospital will become a beacon across the country at the beginning of this March 1941. In fact, one famous quote from that is used in Jack Alexander's piece is, in a few cities, psychopathic divisions of Workers of Alcoholics Anonymous are accorded the same visiting privileges as staff members. Philadelphia General Hospital is one of these. Dr. John F. Stouffer, the chief psychiatrist, says the alcoholics we get here are mostly those who cannot afford private treatment. And this is by far the greatest thing that we have ever been able to offer them. Even among those who occasionally land back in here again, we observe a profound change in personality. You would hardly recognize them. So that was the quote from this Dr. Stouffer from Philadelphia General Hospital. Now, again, Jack visits Akron to see, continues this track. He goes to Akron, basically, again, to see these incredible successes. Again, it's almost like when you look at the stats of this period, Ohio itself has 650 sober members, and of course, it goes down to Jack and his investigation. Show me the documentation. Goes to Dr. Bob and Ann Smith. Probably attends some meetings at the ever-growing King School, and the old photograph at the King School. In fact, it actually made the newspapers, and they were telling it the way it was. So this is exactly how it is. An early issue of the Saturday Evening Post will carry an article on Alcoholics Anonymous, by Jack Alexander. He spent several days in Akron to satisfy himself that it wasn't a racket. So he wasn't hiding it. He was out there to show it the way it was. And of course, that came out on February 9th of 1941. So that places him in Akron doing his research in the article for everyone to see. So again, maybe the pressure's on, don't know. Now, I would bet that after he talked with Dr. Bob, the levity of one alcoholic helping another soon became clear to Jack. And of course, when you look at the seriousness on Dr. Bob's face, it kind of runs true. Maybe Jack, saw kind of the joyfulness, and when he opened his door to the Philadelphia and the New York, group of alcoholics, maybe he only saw teeth, but I would bet that once he got in with Dr. Bob, especially what Dr. Bob was doing at the time frame, he really started to take it to that level. And of course, the King School, he had to have gone to some of those meetings there at the King School. Again, pretty interesting. Now, after all, this was the first, again, this King School group dates all the way back to the drunk squad of the Oxford group. First meeting, 1935. But then, of course, it's described that that meeting grew. And then by 39, it's just states that there were 70 to 90 drunks that met in Dr. Bob's tiny little house. Now, one of Dr. Bob's sponsees, how the King School started, was an exemplary member. His daughter was Mary Louise Gillum, and of course, he approached her school as a possible alternative place to Dr. Bob's house, because of course it was huge, and there's plaques all over that talk about it, and again gives it just plugs all over, and of course that's another plaque that talks about Dr. Bob being a co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, but January 1940 is when again this meeting took place. So it was up and running when Jack Alexander got there, and its numbers were great. And so this was something he saw firsthand. Now, February 38, again, when Frank Amos did his investigation, he wrote down 43 names, again known as the Amos roster, and now it's much greater than that. In fact, this small gathering that took place when Jack was there, their first meeting was at T. Henry and Clarice's Williams house. Now, again, it went from T. Henry's to Dr. Bob's house, and it's described that there were 70 to 90 people. Now, here's a schematic of Dr. Bob's house, especially where they met. That thing is tiny. Can you imagine 70 to 90 people in there? Just to, I mean, right off the bat, number one, there's one toilet. So, again, this is where they met. But again, Jack Alexander went to King School early 1941. And of course, October 1st, 1940, the Alcoholic Foundation actually reported that Akron had 200 people, and Cleveland kind of took the ran point on this, and they had 450 recovered alcoholics. So this was again another jump after the article came out. It went from 2,000 to 8,000. Amazing gratitude for Mary Gillum's father, who approached the school, and of course, the first King School meeting took place January 1940. Now, like so many that Dr. Bob sponsored, Wally Gillum detoxed folks in their home, worked with as many as he could. He always put the others ahead of himself. Wally G had to be present when Jack Alexander wanted to see this process. Another pretty powerful thing that must have been at Jack's disposal. As for this process seen firsthand, there was a recent 1940 pamphlet detailing how this process works. This was, a hot item in Akron during this time. Another one of Dr. Bob's sponsees, and it was written from a fellow journalist, Mr. H. Evan Williams, and of course that pamphlet was a manual for Alcoholics Anonymous, aka the Akron Manual. Now, Jack now had more information. Chances are he already had the New York AA pamphlet, which consisted of several articles from the Houston Press written by Larry Jewell. Now he was exposed to the Akron Manual, again, a detail of a sponsorship and the approach. Now, what's really interesting is Mr. Evans ended up writing a total of 3 pamphlets described there in his obituary. And those 3 pamphlets were Spiritual Milestones, The Second Reader, and of course, the Manual for Alcoholics Anonymous. But for Jack's visit, he definitely had the manual. Now, while he was also in Akron, just kind of how he, did back in Philadelphia when he saw the members approach a sick man in the Philadelphia General Hospital, I can't help but wonder if he also visited the alcoholic ward designated to alcoholism at Akron St. Thomas Hospital, and while there, get an honest opinion from someone who has the alcoholic ward designed around AA and Dr. Bob. And of course, at St. Thomas, we're can't just got to wonder if he interacted with Sister Ignatia at all. No documentation they met, but just I wonder what that conversation looked like if it took place. Again, if he was Jack Alexander doing this amount of detailed research, I would say that took place. Again, from Akron, he didn't just stop there. Amos went to Akron, and that was it. But Jack Alexander was, he was going to dig. So he goes up to Cleveland again to see how AA conducted itself outside of the co-founders' participation. Remember, Dr. Bob was centered in Akron and Bill was in New York, and this was Cleveland. And so he went up there and had this firsthand, um, kind of discovery session again. And it was here where, this whole thing was again based on Dr. Bob's core principle, helping the other fellow. Now, who's who in this particular photograph? This is the Borton group. Some of the early members. Again, this is kind of cheating, but to give you an idea, you have George McDermott, seen there on the bottom left. He was the first patient that went to Deaconess Hospital in Cleveland. You have Lloyd Tate, whose story is a Rolling Stone. He's also referred to as in Tradition 3 as the man with another affliction. You got Dick Stanley, who is going to be in the Saturday Evening Post photograph, of course, Bill Wilson, and then, of course, Jack Darrell in this particular photograph, who was the Rockefeller experiment, and Abby Goldrick. And it was at his house that the first meeting in Cleveland took place. So this was the company, at least some of the individuals in this early time that Jack Darrow actually in the 1940s relocated to Cleveland. So I wonder if they interacted. But again, he didn't stop there. He visited Cleveland, but he also went to Chicago. Now there must have again while they're visiting some of these earliest of members, and of course the person would be Earl Treat. Earl Treat, founder of AA in Chicago, seen in a couple of photographs, especially one with Dr. Bob, Earl Treat, and Minnesota's Barry Collins. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, again, another sponsee of Dr. Bob's, his story is he sold himself short. He is a result of the Liberty magazine article, and by the end of 1941, Chicago will have 450 members. But when Jack visited, they had around 100 to 200, if that, and by October, December of 1940, and that's described in Chicago archives. It's described that the Chicago chapter began holding meetings once a week in a Evanston, Illinois apartment, September of 1939, and downtown Chicago meeting for AAs and their family was added in early October. This open AA meeting, the Tuesday night big meeting, grew in attendance. Now, this is where Earl Treat lived. He lived in 1324 Central Street in Evanston. And of course, it was the home of he and his wife, Katie, Catherine Treat. And so that was one apartment in Evanston. So option A. Also, while there, again, other solid pioneers that were there at the time were, of course, Sylvia Kaufman, as well as Sylvia's assistant, Grace Coltis. And again, fun fact, 2 months after Jack visits Grace and Sylvia in Chicago, Grace actually gets the credit for the first local central office set up based out of their clubhouse at the time. And of course, that was May 1941. But again, this was the second apartment meeting. This was Grace's apartment off of Maple Street in Evanston. And the one that was downtown was actually described as this visit there. This is 100 plus and their families. This was on 179 North Wabash between Lake and Lower Wagon Drive. Again, this was the big big meeting for all. Now, at this point, and all the research he had, short period of time. Remember, he got the assignment. His last article was in February, and by March, he's printing it. So, Jack had seen enough. Nowhere is this experience described. It's not until really the second article in the 1945 Grapevine sums it up. But it wasn't just the words of alcoholics. He saw for himself firsthand, right? Doctors, he talked to clergy, he talked to friends, especially the families of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just like when Frank Amos traveled out to Akron to investigate this cure for alcoholism, the Rockefeller folks early in 1938 with about 43 names. Jack also became sold, just like Frank results. This is the real deal. This is not a fad. This is not a quack cure. This is not a hustle or a fraudulent scheme. Is it possible that for the first time in recorded history, there might actually be a solution to this dire plight of hopeless alcoholism? And of course, he took this to heart, and the result of it became the March 1st article, famous cover done by Norman Rockwell, and it was titled Alcoholics Anonymous. But what's really interesting is the subtitle: "Freed slaves of drink, now they free others." And of course, that's the age old secret is of AA is helping the other fella. Now, this was the first major boost about the work of AA, and hope was given to the hopeless again, and it begins to spread around the country. It's described that membership shot up to about 8,000. Now, the entirety of this article is actually longer than you think. In fact, it starts pretty much on page 9. Couple of photographs. We'll get into that in a couple of slides, but it just keeps going and going. It's like the Energizer Bunny. And there's, again, I'm still not showing everything, but there is a lot written down there, and pretty fascinating. It's again, he wrote everything he saw and experienced, and of course, this impact went to a readership described as 3 million nationwide. Now, big note. As for anonymity, right? There was a slight stipulation. Names were to be omitted. Again, first name, last initial, but there had to be some pictures, or else the Saturday Evening Post would not run the story. And so this is one of those photographs, and it was actually taken out of the 24th Street Clubhouse in New York. Now, again, this is just a kind of a little grainy photograph. Closer to the original is again this one. Maybe about a third or fourth generation shot, but it's pretty clear, and it definitely gives the temperature of the time. But it was the 24th Street Clubhouse, and of course, the who's who in this particular photograph. We'll start off with, on the very far right, you can only see. I mean, on the very far left, you can only see half of his face, but that is Horace Crystal, who is the vice president of Works Publishing Inc. You have Helen P., who was a newer New York member. And I love this guy, Tom Mulholland, a retired firefighter. He's the guy that introduced Bill Wilson to Father Ed Dowling. And of course, you also have Thomas Burrell, who will soon to be a Class B trustee for the Alcoholic Foundation. And of course, none other than Ruth Hawk, who typed the big book, as well as being the first national AA secretary. None other than Bill Wilson sitting there. Of course, Dick Stanley makes another appearance. He was from the Cleveland Borton Group, but he was present and accounted for. You also have Lois Wilson, who starts up, again, something called the family groups, or Al-Anon family groups. And then you have a gentleman by the name of Gordon McDougall, who was president in Philly, also spearhead New Jersey, and has a hand in Scotland Group when it gets up and running again. It was the Scotland Group that registered in New York through Gordon McDougall. You have a guy by the name of Ray Wood, and then my favorite is this guy, Bob Furlong. He is from Massachusetts, aka Ralph Furlong is what they call him. And of course, Jim from page 35, the whiskey milkshake guy from his story, another prodigal story. So those were everybody that was in that particular photograph. As for this story of the 24th Street Clubhouse, originally 33.5 West 24th Street in Chelsea. And of course, you can kind of see there, and now there's a doorway there. And the note here would be Bill and Lois actually lived here at the 24th Street Clubhouse for some time after their eviction from Clinton Street. So during all of Jack Alexander's investigating, they were homeless through it all until April 11th of 1941, when they landed in Stepping Stones. So it's possible that when they took those photographs, Bill and Lois, were actually living at there. Now, also, again, going back to Tom Mulholland, not to mention Bill met Father Dowling there at the 24th Street Clubhouse, described that there was a knock on the door on a cold sleeting night at 10 p.m. And the clubhouse custodian, Tom, answered the door saying, again, going down, and the club's maintenance man said there was some bum here from St. Louis to see him. Reluctantly, Bill said, well, look at the hour. Okay, send him up. And again, to himself, he muttered, not another drunk. And, that ball started rolling. Bill and Father Ed began their relationship at this time frame. And Bill refers to Father Ed as his spiritual advisors. Now, why am I telling this? Because Jack Alexander and Father Ed both come from St. Louis, Missouri. So pretty fascinating again. And it's described that, Father Ed climbed the stairs and again walked down the hall with his back in a fix, and had sat by the hearth and interacted with Bill Wilson. Of course, a couple of photographs, kind of grainy ones, of the 24th Street Clubhouse, but more pictures in that article. This picture again, shows what we do best. Basically, AA members helping the still suffering alcoholics. This is rendition of Man on the Bed, maybe Man on the Bed 2. The people present in this photograph. Bottom left sitting is Earl Treat, again founder of AA in Chicago. So he comes back into the picture, and of course, Cleveland. I mean, not Cleveland, but Akron. Bill Dotson from Akron, Ohio, is sitting in the corner, and of course, leaning over the rail there is Roy McCreary, co-founder of AA in Detroit, Michigan. Now, with this particular photograph, it's interesting because there's another one that kind of parallels this, and it was actually used by Mitchell Kay in his book "How It Worked: The Story of Clarence Snyder," and just almost undeniable similarities in these two pictures, which suggest that there were more photographs that were taken during that time frame. And of course, these matching points were the wood paneling midway up on the walls. Of course, there was a matching pattern on the curtains, as well as the bedspread with the little crossings. There were two chairs in identical positions, and of course, there was a table with this in the same position with an AA book, with a gentleman sitting right next to it. And finally, the striped pajamas. So, again, more will be described. And it is described that in that photograph is Clarence Snyder, Bill Dotson, Archie Trowbridge, Roy McCreary, Earl Treat, and several other AA members were present during this interaction. So again, all this is found in his article. Now, after this Jack Alexander article, news of this solution travels people who would end up writing to the New York office to find out how they can get sober. Now, as if the New York office wasn't busy before, it's described that a deluge of letters from all across the country, painstakingly answered pamphlets and books were sent out. Now, these need help lists were given to local sober members or educated alcoholics. People on business, and that would go and visit with these AA loners. And again, it just kind of this is definitely cheating. This is 1945. Look at the office there in New York, but it definitely tells the story. Now, the article hit on March 1st of 1941, but there was an interesting description a couple of months later in the AA Bulletin. This was bulletin number 3. It just so happened to be the one with the Serenity Prayer going out for the first time, again at the bottom. But this was June 30th of 19, and it reads, much water has gone over the dam since our bulletin of last January, mailed just previous to the appearance of the Saturday Evening Post article. The necessity of answering all inquiries as promptly as possible has delayed the printing of this bulletin. It says, to date, your local office has received 2,325 Saturday Evening Post inquiries. This is within 3 months. With an additional 2,075 during the same time frame from various other sources, making a total of 4,400 letters answered from this office since March 1st. Approximately 50% of these letters were immediately referred to AA groups for personal cooperation, but the balance were so kind of located again, in the middle of nowhere, as to make it virtually impossible to arrange personal contact. So they were trying. what's really fascinating, again, some of those folks that read that article, may not have even gotten to the end where it told, how to contact the New York office. Some actually wrote the Philadelphia General Hospital, which is how that article started out with. And this particular letter is from Hibbing, Minnesota. It is a Mrs. Edward Friedman, and it's to Dr. John F. Staffer, and it reads, I have just completed reading the article in the Saturday Evening Post entitled Alcoholics Anonymous and became very much interested in this story. I saw your name mentioned in the article, so I took a chance on writing to you with hopes I could get some results from you. My husband has been drinking for several years, but quite heavy the last couple of years. He is a man of 37 years of age, and we have a nice home with 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 7 months, all girls. Right now, he goes about every 10 days or a week and is out for 2 days, and that's the binger. He is in danger of losing his job. He was a clerk in a clothing store. This last year, he went to take the cure 2 times. It cost $200 each time, besides loss of work. We are almost broke, and I am very disgusted with our life. It is hard for me to leave, as I have no parents and 3 small children, so I am always hoping he will snap out of it. But now I am at the end of my rope and all ready to give up. However, I am very much interested in this AA organization, but how could he get any good out of this when he lives in a small town? If you can suggest anything that I could do about my husband, I would greatly appreciate this information. I just imagine that a lot of these letters that make these appearances are from loved ones. And what's really truly amazing about this one is he forwarded it to the Alcoholic Foundation. Again, pretty fascinating close. You will find this a letter from Mrs. Friedman, and the contact number was exchanged. Again, just a snapshot of that. Now back to the Foundation AA Bulletin. It's another description. What's really fascinating is in the blue underline. It says correspondence is also mentioned with each other of this 116 groups on the attached list. It says there are 62 White Star groups. So you got 116 groups, 62 White Star groups, you got 24 Red Star groups, and 30 Green Star. Sometimes a great many letters are exchanged, sometimes only a few, all depending upon the need and desire for a particular group or individual. So these are, this is now again exploding. So they're counting as of 1941, 116 groups. There are 62 White Star groups. There are 24 Red Star groups. And of course, the Green Star groups register as 30. Now, what are these? Now, this prospect information, when people wrote in, was actually noted, and the list of people who needed help were tallied, organized, and then they started putting this map on the wall. They used 3 color pins for identification. Again, this is kind of cheating. This is a photograph was taken in 45, but we do know that the map went up very, very early. And the map actually survived, and it's described that the White Star groups were established groups with many solid members and growing. So definitely a point of reference. The Red Star groups were attempting to start. They were had very small numbers, described as struggling. And of course, the Green Star groups were literally isolated loaders out in the middle of nowhere, single people. And of course, no group. It was all male, done by male only. So pretty fascinating. And this map survived. It's in Stepping Stones. This is just an example of some of these tallies. This again is definitely cheating. Some of the dates are a little, after or before the Jack Alexander article, but this is what they looked like. It was the name. It was a brief description, but again, these lists were tallied and given to folks. So 2 examples of the reach of the Jack Alexander article. And of course, following Nancy, when she did Nancy K, when she did her Women of AA, looking at one Sybil Corwin. This is a 1985 photograph of Sybil pointing out the Saturday Evening Post. And the other one, of course, is Esther Elizalde, also gives credit single-handedly to the Jack Alexander article as well. Now, for Sybil, Sybil's claim to fame was the first woman to enter AA west of the Mississippi. Her date of sobriety was March 21st, 1941. Her name at the time was Sybil Maxwell, though she later opened her talks by saying she was married a couple of times. My name is Sybil Doris Adams Stratton Hart Maxwell Willis C., and I am an alcoholic. So pretty funny there. Now, she read the Saturday Evening article in March 1st, again, which contained the article. She wrote to New York and received a reply from Ruth Hawk, told her that there were no women members in California, not yet, but that another woman by the name of Marnie Mann was sober in New York. Ruth referred to her to this small group of men that met in California at the Cecil Hotel. And of course, the note was, is if you need help, call this guy, Cliff W. And of course, Ruth had given Sybil his phone number. Now, Cliff was Cliff Walker. He was a Panel One delegate. And of course, that's just a photograph of him at a young age. But what's interesting is that Western Union Cable is he was the Panel One delegate for Los Angeles, California. And this was who Sybil went for help. Sybil ends up being the one who sponsors all the women. In fact, she was put there almost from the beginning. Sponsored the women in Southern California, a few men for a while. And even her brother Tex Adams joined AA and in Los Angeles, and he ended up founding the LA group Hole in the Ground. And there's a photograph of Sybil and her brother at Hole in the Ground. No, Sybil's latter husband, and one of those long names that she introduces, Jim Willis, will later found Gamblers Anonymous in 1957. So the note here would be the ripples keep reaching the shore. And again, just imagine if she did not read that Saturday Evening Post article or give it any merit. The other one, Esther Elizalde, read the article, and again, she was considered, a Red Star location. There were three members in this one small group, and she was one of them. And it's again, it starts in Houston. And the story is Larry Jewell for Health relocated to Houston from Cleveland. He was one of Dr. Bob's sponsees, kind of bad shape, a little rough on the edges. Reads the book on the train south, has an awakening somewhere in that process, goes to the New York Press newspaper, asked to write a story about AA. He is granted 6 articles, and they are there. And of course, he wrote those, and it just so happens to catch the eye of a non-alcoholic clergyman in Houston. What's fascinating about those 6 articles, again, it became the first Alcoholic Foundation pamphlet that was handed out from the GSO, or the New York central headquarters. And of course, it was also one of Dr. Bob's kids. Also, major note, almost certain that one of the first things Jack was given along with the big book was the first AA pamphlet printed from the Alcoholic Foundation. So he had this pamphlet. He also had the manual for Alcoholics Anonymous when he did his investigative. But again, the story of Esther Elizalde, Houston Press. Bishop Quinn was the Episcopal priest who read the Houston Press articles. His first prospects were, of course, Larry Jewell, and follow soon after is Roy Yergin and Ed Hudson, both in Houston. His name is Sergeant Roy Yergin. By this time, Larry Jewell will have relapsed. So again, Roy gets the cake. First member in Texas, second member in Houston is, of course, Ed Hudson. And from there, again, Esther joins the fray. We're looking at Houston, Texas. Her sobriety date is May 16th of 1941. Full name is Esther Gill Elizalde. The description is her husband, Frank P. Elizalde, read a story about AA in the Saturday Evening Post a few weeks before. He finally showed it to her with the ultimatum: if you try this thing, I will go along with you. If you don't, you will have to go home. I cannot sit by and watch you destroy yourself. And of course, she read the article and took the actions. She wrote New York, there was a reply that there were two sober members in Houston, Sergeant Roy Jernigan and Ed Harris. Again, Larry relapsed and was directed to them. Now there are three in Houston. During her second year in AA and sobriety, she and her husband Frank were transferred to Dallas, and she starts AA in Dallas in 1943. So again, another scenario of, what happened if she didn't read the Jack Alexander article. Ripples hit the shore. In fact, she ended up passing away, and that's just in 1916. Just a nerd note. I don't know really. It's just pretty powerful message. I'm glad to hear that the Wire received. What a wonderful, wonderful AA and friend. So pretty interesting. Again, all throughout Texas. Now, the impact of Jack Alexander's article by the end of the year of that 1941, this was pretty interesting. This was the first nationwide group registry. It was published December 31st, and it went from just a handful of groups to this, from March 1st to December 31st, New Year's Eve. And of course, it was 4 pages long. It was 8.5 by 14 legal pages, and it had all the established groups and rough estimate of numbers. Plus the city, state, and contact. It also had a tab for the just beginning or the red star, and of course the isolated AA loners, the green star on page 4. And of course, there's a note. Georgia is on this page. We had just started, so pretty interesting. As of December 31st, there were 70 states that were considered White Star up and running, with 5,267 members. There were 25 struggling or Red Star, including 5 new groups in California, right? So again, going back to the California growth, there were 2 new groups in Texas for a total of 4. Pretty fascinating. And of course, with isolated members, 34 isolated, the Green Star, including Guatemala, Mexico, and Canada. So pretty fascinating. By May 1945, Jack wrote his second AA piece about his encounter with, these way too happy ex-drunkards when he started to look into Alcoholics Anonymous, describing how he thought we were just, off, we were Broadway actors. And of course, the headline was Jack Alexander thought AAs were pulling his leg. Some of the excerpts from this particular one is: my first contact with actual AAs came when a group of 4 men of them called at my apartment one afternoon. This session was pleasant, but it didn't help my skepticism any. They were good looking and well dressed, and we sat around drinking Coca-Colas, which was all they would take. They spun yarns about their horrendous drinking misadventures. The story sounded spurious, and after the visitors had left, I had strong suspicion that my leg was being pulled. They had behaved like a bunch of actors sent out by some Broadway casting agency. There's another paragraph, and that is: the next morning, I took the subway to the headquarters of Alcoholics Anonymous in downtown Manhattan, where I met Bill W. This Bill W. was a very disarming guy. What a great description. Very disarming guy, and an expert in introducing the stranger into the psychology, psychiatry, physiology, pharmacology, folklore of alcoholism. Description. It was an interesting experience, but at the end of it, my fingers were still crossed. My skepticism suffered a few minor scratches, but not enough to hurt. And of course, towards the end, now I know I was among a few genuine alcoholics anyway. The bearded, fume-breathing lads of AA skeptics too. And I had some company. So again, I highly recommend somebody, just grab this. You can see it online. It's May 1945 to read the full article. Now, what's interesting is the story for this second Saturday Evening Post article, because Jack Alexander actually wrote 2 for the Saturday Evening Post, which makes a total of 3. And of course, this on June 8th, Bill writes to Jack. Basically, this is from GSO Archives, saying, if you can spare me a little time, I'd like to come down to Philadelphia and see you. 8 years ago, the Saturday Evening Post took an AA out of the pioneering stage and made it a movement. Uncounted thousands owe their great good fortune, yes, their very lives, to what the Post did then. We still ship reprints of your article by the carload. Nowadays, AA rarely asks for publicity. I suppose we get it in enormous quantities, partly for that reason. Yet the time is here when an exception should be made. The point of this letter is that I would definitely like to ask you folks as a favor, will you print another piece about us? The general public has only the vaguest idea what our society really looks like. I think they would be interested in an inside view. From our standpoint, a vital job has to be done. Now that the recovery formula is above ground and working at a prodigious rate, our main problem is that maintaining our unity as a movement until every drunk in the world has a good look at the idea. So then if John Q. Public could get an inside view of what our fellowship is really like, and it could become quite clear to him what good AAs do and what they don't do in their relationships with each other. Interesting how he worded that. And with the outside world. The Saturday Evening Post would have written an insurance policy on our future, the value of which no man could ever reckon. And of course, that was in 1949, a letter from Bill to Jack. And of course, the result bore fruit April 1st, 1950. And it was this second printing. This is titled The Drunkard's Best Friend. But the caption said, 9 years ago, the Post reported on the then obscure group known as Alcoholics Anonymous. Since that time, self-rehabilitated men and women have sobered up an astonishing number of America's heaviest drinkers, and this is how they do it. So again, this is the second article that he wrote in the Saturday Evening Post, Drunkard's Best Friend. And of course, pictures go a long way, right? Page 2 is neat. Instead of the Philadelphia General Hospital, it is centered around the work being done at the first ever, quote, AA ward in a hospital. Again, this is all before traditions, and it's about time the little doctor who loves drunks gets into the picture, because Duffy's Tavern at the bottom is from Knickerbocker Hospital. That's right, Dr. Silkworth switched hospitals. Actually, he was employed at both for a little while. Again, AA archives state that Knickerbocker is the first AA ward and is shown very successful in the February 1946 Grapevine. And that's the title of the Grapevine article. AA ward at Knickerbocker proved successful. Now, it was Dr. Silkworth, right? It was also his assistant, a man by the name of Dr. Meyer Texon, and of course, another nurse, Teresa Rowans, aka Teddy Rowe, Teddy R. Again, note this particular article is, well, it's a joke, but it's about 10 minutes from the July 1950 Cleveland Convention, where Dr. Texon spoke in lieu of Silkworth, because Silkworth could not make it to the first ever international convention at Cleveland. But again, it's interesting that this is where the drunkard, it's all in the Drunkard's Best Friend. And of course, Duffy Tavern, just a larger photograph showing what we showed, do best. Again, a bunch of AAs in coats and ties working with people and patients. So pretty fascinating. Again, now what's also fascinating is when you look at the top of page 18, there's of A Drunkard's Best Friend, there's a referral to success rates, and it's right in that area. And we take that and blow it up. It said 6 years after it all began, when this magazine first examined the small but encouraging phenomenon, the March 1st, 41, the band could count 2,000 members. It says today it is listed membership exceeds 90,000. How cool is that? It says the intake of shaky-fingered newcomers, now at its highest in AA history, is running at the rate of about 20,000 plus a year. The number that will stick is again a matter of conjecture. And it goes on, it says, if experience repeats, according to AA old timers, see if this sounds familiar, about 1/2 of them will stay sober from the start. Then 1/4 will achieve sobriety after a few skids. And the other 1/4 will remain problem drinkers. A problem drinker is by definition is one who takes a drink for some compulsive reason and cannot identify as having taken it, and is unable to stop until he is drunk and acting like a lunatic. So the allergy takes over. Sounds familiar? It's again referred to in print in our forward to the second edition of the 1955 second edition big book, forward to the second. But I got to point out that it isn't the first time. The first time those successes were printed were in December 1945 Grapevine article, where it's pretty much identical. So fascinating that it was the first, kind of, national publicity on those, at least that part of the forward to the second edition with the 55% success rate. But on our April 22nd, 1950, Bill wrote, it was described in archives Ben Bibbs. And of course, Bill praised Jack Alexander on the two articles. And the note here is there was no Ben Bibbs, but there was a Benjamin Hibbs, who was the editor in chief. And just as like he wrote, Jack Alexander, in his recent Saturday Evening Post story, The Drunkard's Best Friend, has done it again. It is not the least exaggeration to say that Jack's Alcoholics Anonymous article of 9 years ago brought recovery within reach of 10,000 alcoholics and great happiness to as many homes. And of course, we know that the whole world will one day agree that these two articles of Jack's about AA are to be regarded as greatest public service the Saturday Evening Post has ever done. And that's saying a great deal indeed. Pretty powerful. In fact, one of the very first pamphlets, it's just, released sometime again in the 40s, but Freed Slaves to Drink. This pamphlet has circulated, different variations of it. Here's one around the 1950s, again 1970s, the 1990s, again with the circle and the triangle made it on that one. But 2000s $plus, and of course, it's there's just several versions of this. There was a reprint in '76 in the Grapevine of the article. But what's interesting is the lead up to it, just that one paragraph. In 1941, over half our present 1 million members were teenagers, children, or not even born yet. Old timers or newcomers, virtually all of us owe a debt of gratitude to Jack Alexander, who died in '75. His talent, diligence, and insight focused the first strong favorable light on Alcoholics Anonymous. Jack remained a lifelong friend of the fellowship, serving eventually as a non-alcoholic trustee on AA's General Service Board. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But again, that refers to something that was read by Bernard Smith in his 1954 closing remarks for the General Service Conference about the having AA for the individual who has yet to be born. And it also referred to him being a trustee. Yeah, he was. He was there for the second panel of 1952. He's actually later in 1951, but he was present for he's up top. List number 1, Jack Alexander. He lived in Philadelphia, Walnut Street. He's also stated as being present all the way up to 1956. That's when his last here. He's also listed in the 1952 AA service structure, one of the first pamphlets that show, exactly the upside down triangle in its earliest version. And you can see again, trustees of the Alcoholic Foundation on the second column, and Jack Alexander and president accounted for. Just to round it all out, Saturday Evening Post reprinted his 41 article, broken into 3 issues in the 80s, November '82, December, and January of '83. Little excerpts plus little interesting notes. And it's as though the Saturday Evening Post was just beginning. Some of the stuff that Saturday Evening Post wrote also that paralleled, it's Jack Alexander with, about Alcoholics Anonymous was this one. This was October 18th of 1952. And of course, it was not Jack Alexander, but it was somebody else. But it was called I Am a Nurse in an Alcoholic Ward. And of course, this is Teddy R., the description of her role in Knickerbocker. Experience from a nurse's station at Knickerbocker Hospital in the alcoholism ward. And at this point, it is just Dr. Meyer Texon, I think actually that switched. But again, Teddy R. was the nurse there. Another picture taken from the Knickerbocker Hospital, it appears they took down, or is from another angle of the Duffy's Tavern. You can see the patients in the ward. Again, another cool find, Soper's right-hand man during this alcoholic work. It was here. Nurse Teddy actually came and spoke in Atlanta. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Teddy Rosa, who has nursed more than 5,000, will describe her work in an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at the 5522 West Peachtree Street Clubhouse. Another article that came out, and this was by a guy named Jerome Ellison, July 2nd, 1955, Help for the Alcoholics Family. This is about Al-Anon family groups. And of course, it goes in depth. And just to give you an idea of some of the photographs, the caption: Al-Anon family groups. Here, Judge Edwin Moore, the mine friend, again. So several photographs. I thought I took that one out, but it also shows, this famous picture of going up the stairs with the AA, door welcome, and of course a description of who and where that is. But it is in this Help for the Alcoholics Family. Al-Anon started with this gentleman, DeVoe Bingham, being the alcoholic, and of course his wife, Ann Bingham, and Ann and Lois. Again, remember the letters to Dr. Stouffer about the wife talking about her husband. And again, the bore fruit, Al-Anon family groups with Lois and Ann Bingham. So pretty fascinating there. And of course, another photograph of Letter and the fact. You can see again, this was an Al-Anon meeting in the early 50s or mid 50s, I think. Just fascinating stuff. Another article, again, nothing about AA in this particular one. This is May 12th of 1951, and it's just about a gentleman by the name of Austin McCorwick. And what's fascinating is it's pretty much about prison reform. In fact, it's all taken place here at San Quentin, and that's Austin McCorwick standing there. It's pretty lengthy. Again, not really about it's Alcoholics Anonymous, but why is this important? Because Austin McCorwick on May 4th of 1942, aside from being a Class A trustee in a few years, Austin McCormick will be. This entire article was taken at San Quentin Penitentiary, and of course, Warden Clinton Duffy, in the first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting that took place inside the facility, where they let AA members behind the walls. And the claim to fame was the revocation rate from 80% down to 20%. And of course, there's that whole process. So pretty fascinating. That'll be at a later time. But what's also interesting is December 6th of 1952, Jack Alexander comes back into the fray. This time it's something about Recovery Inc. It is outside of Chicago. It's actually in several cities, but what's particularly interesting, nothing to do with drinking, nothing to do with AA. There are no steps to follow. Again, it is about a fellowship with mild to severe mental disorders who band together to help each other. And what's interesting is he actually says, like Alcoholics Anonymous, they protect their own sanity by helping one another. So again, just another thing that Jack Alexander does. It should be, noted that Father Ed Dowling was also involved with Recovery Inc. very early. So this, again, these slender threads all kind of, connect towards the end. And the 50-year anniversary, it was again talked about, again, and ironic that the cover is Elvis, of course. Maybe he should have read that. Anyway, just saying. But what's really fascinating is when you take that caption and blow it up, it says, the Post is still hearing from grateful relatives of alcoholics. This is, again, in 1985. We received this letter in 1982. Your magazine did the ultimate service for my father. He was physically a wreck, having DTs. He would not have lived long. I took him to the nearest chapter meeting, and he swore he would never drink again. So just an interesting thing that happened, of course, and that was the closing. Approximately and appropriately enough, the Akron meeting of Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob Smith had its origins in the consulting rooms of Carl Jung, and great believer in synchronicity, significant coincidences. What we were just talking about, the slender threads. Today, 50 years after the meeting, more than 1 million people have found sobriety in AA, and still, and any single one of them is staying sober is in itself so unlikely one must conclude that the lives of each one of those men and women have been the product of synchronicity, or what some might call a miracle. So again, it brings it into fray, and I can't leave without bringing this into light. There's something interesting about the cover, again known as the Jack Alexander Saturday Evening Post. And what's special about this thing? Well, it just so happens, as of this Alcoholics Anonymous edition, there has never been a Norman Rockwell cover painting where the subject's face was not shown. It caused an uproar. People wanted to know what gives, and it was such a big deal that 6 weeks later they had to answer this flood of inquiries. Who was the woman that was the cover? Ironically anonymous, right? Alcoholics Anonymous, the anonymous cover, but they wrote in, had to print a story about that, and 6 weeks later on April 12th it was answered. So this is a trivia question if anybody wants to do this at their convention. Who was on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post article? And it's described that it is, again, first off, wondering about the face, which launched 3 million odd posts. Her name was Millicent Madison. She is the 16-year-old neighbor of Norman Rockwell who posed for that photograph. She came down and basically restaged the picture there at the Saturday Evening Post in Philadelphia, and of course, that's her holding again the Alcoholics Anonymous picture instead of the one. So he ended up again passing away, and just a tiny little excerpt, cherry pick. 30 years ago, he wrote the Saturday Evening Post article on Alcoholics Anonymous, which has been credited with assisting the small organization in developing into a major force in combating alcoholism. So again, it went from 2,000 to 8,000 to God knows how many, and in how many different states. And it was all Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was all Jack Alexander really took us to that level. And I thank you all. I will hand it back to you.